Losing the Plot is a series examining video game narratives. As you'd expect, it's full of spoilers, and today's episode spoils the entirety of the recent Tomb Raider trilogy. You have been warned. Tomb Raider is one of the most important games franchises for me. Without it, I wouldn't be into gaming to the extent that I am now. As a kid, I'd play Mario and platformers based on my favourite cartoons, and wouldn't even entertain the idea of playing something else. And then Tomb Raider happened. At 11 years old, I first saw the game in action at a friend's place, and it hooked me immediately. The spooky caves, the hidden Aztec village, the puzzle-based gameplay. It was so unlike what I was used to at that point, and it intrigued me. It made me want a PlayStation, and from there I played so many different games off the back of it, and then never stopped. I clearly wasn't the only one. This was the late 1990s where Lara Croft became the biggest name in video games. She graced the cover of fashion magazines, advertised sports drinks and cars, got drowned by Simon Pegg in cult sitcom Spaced, and even appeared on a tour with U2, when it wasn't an embarrassment to be within 50 feet of Bono. She of course also got a movie with the star of the moment Angelina Jolie landing the main role and nailing it, quite frankly.
I woke up this morning and I just hated everything.
Tomb Raider has been a consistent presence in the games industry since 1996, as its initial success solidified it into a major franchise. However, these days it looks very different. The series saw a reboot in 2013 with a younger, less experienced Lara thrown into harsh situations and forced to use her wits to survive. The idea behind these most recent titles is an origin story that shapes Lara into who she is, made most explicit with the second of this trilogy titled The Rise of the Tomb Raider. But how effective is this trilogy at shaping Lara? Have Crystal Dynamics managed to forge a narrative that helps give weight and nuance to Lara's character? Or have they completely lost the plot? I'm going to be taking a look at each game of the trilogy individually in a moment, but before we can do that, we need to ask, who is Lara Croft? Who was she originally designed to be? How were the original game stories written? First of all, analysis of the first three games' narratives would fit comfortably on the back of a napkin. By their own admission, original developers Core Design created an action-adventure game with a bunch of cool levels, and then hastily wrote a story around them. Hell, the character went through numerous changes in development, from a lazy Indiana Jones knockoff to a sexy South American named Laura Cruz, before landing on Lara Croft, a sassy adventuring British aristocrat. This freely assembled narrative goes some way to explaining why the Greece section of the first game features distinctly Roman things like a Colosseum and a room dedicated to Neptune. Doesn't explain Thor's presence, but what can you do? They really were just throwing stuff together without much thought for narrative sense. It's also why Tomb Raider 3's story just doesn't work as a whole. The developers decided to send Lara to India, and to Area 51, and to Antarctica, and then couldn't really figure out how to connect them all together, so here's some spooky artifacts, I guess. They came from a meteorite. Yeah, that works. Cool. The game doesn't even explain why Lara's in India at the start, she just is, go with it, look at these scary statues, it's fine. Tomb Raider 2 worked, but I think this was a happy accident. It was mainly just her chasing down a mafia cult with bad accents, and ending with her fighting a dragon. There was nothing deep about the story in any way, but as a method of moving Lara from Venice to the bottom of the ocean to Tibet, and then the Great Wall of China, it was fine. But what held these games together was Lara herself. She was a simple character without a great arc, but she had some strong defining traits. She clearly loves adventure, and one of her first lines in the series,
"I'm sorry, I only play for sport,"
defined her instantly. This cocky, sassy and smooth line instantly painted Lara as a twin pistol-toting badass, confident in her abilities and in it for the thrill of the adventure. And yet, moments like her carefully reading the inscriptions in the Tomb of Teotihuacan shows a deep love of history and mythology, and goes some way to explaining why she does what she does. This version of Lara took the world by storm. Of course, she was very 90s and very British, so she fit right into the cool Britannia culture of the time. She sat along the likes of Oasis and Trainspotting as what made Britain the coolest place in the world to be at the time. But Core knew they didn't just want to keep throwing levels together haphazardly. Tomb Raider 4, The Last Revelation, worked to improve the narrative. The story and levels were designed in the opposite order this time, creating a more consistent, Egypt-focused adventure. It draws from a rich seam of Egyptian culture and history, and fleshes out Lara as a character whose love of adventure can sometimes lead her to making mistakes like, inadvertently kicking off the apocalypse. We've all been there. Tomb Raider 4 is my favourite game in the entire series. The narrative isn't super advanced because of technical limitations and a lesser desire for strong video game narratives than 1999, but it works well for its genre, and next to the inventive puzzles, fascinating environments, and sheer love of Egyptology, it is the template for what a Tomb Raider game should be, and it defines who Lara Croft is as a character beyond just big guns and big guns. She was still the same swan-diving, pistol-toting badass with a backpack full of quips, but now we got to see a more thoughtful side to Lara. Her interactions with Jean-Yves, a French archaeologist with the world's least convincing accent, showed us a softer side. Her love of history and mythology is brought more to the forefront, and despite her own selfishness with adventuring, she still knows she must correct what she's done. The games that followed have been a mixed bag, but for much of the series I still got what I wanted. Lara's character shifted a little bit, but some aspects were consistent. A love of history, an adventurous spirit, a sassy confidence, and a cartoonish degree of athleticism. The gameplay sometimes shifted in difficulty or length, but the focus was still on exploration, puzzle solving, and the awe of walking in on an ancient site. It's exactly what I'm here for. And then, 2013 happened. That was the year the franchise saw a radical shift. Crystal Dynamics announced a reboot of the franchise focused on the origins of Lara, learning how to fend for herself in a harsh environment. It was said to be a little bit creepy, and survival elements were said to be a central focus. To represent its reboot status, it was just called Tomb Raider, although from this point I'm calling it 2013 or Survivor to avoid confusion. It didn't really resemble Tomb Raider though. Here Lara Croft was not a self-assured badass with twin pistols, but a fresh-faced university student who approached situations timidly. The developers themselves wanted Lara to be a character you'd want to protect, a far cry from the Lara that women wanted to be, and men wanted to be also. Gameplay-wise, we had a Tomb Raider that focused on resource management and crafting, and a bow and an axe were set to be the main tools of the trade. I was confused by the direction, but gave it a chance. Its position as an origin story explained the difference in personality, while a stranded Lara fending for herself was in fact part of her backstory in the classic games anyway. There was plenty of opportunity for her to grow into the Lara we all know and love. Survivor tells the story of a young Lara Croft trying to find a mythical island off the coast of Japan called Yamatai, assisted by university friends, a friend of her father's named Roth and his men, and a slimeball celebrity historian called Dr. Whitman. They do find Yamatai when their ship collides with the island in a storm, and it quickly becomes apparent that the island is already inhabited by a feral bunch of people who string Lara up in a cave full of bodies and ritual candles. From here, Lara escapes and utilizes knowledge taught to her by Roth and makes herself a campsite after escaping. This timid, shivering Lara comforts herself with videos of her friends on the ship and is eager to get back to them. Things do not improve as further island residents kidnap her friend Sam, attempt to kidnap and sexually assault Lara herself, and murder a whole bunch of other people. Lara manages to reunite with her friends and crewmates at various points in the story as they all try and find a way off the island, while also uncovering its secrets along the way. As Lara explores, she gets more and more resourceful, and her demeanour becomes more confident. Eventually, she figures out the island's supernatural secret, ends the island's curse, and leads her friends home to safety. And it succeeded in telling that story. Lara is a sympathetic character, starting out as a focused and serious student of archaeology who's never been in a truly dangerous situation. But her determination and her knowledge work in her favour, and while she stumbles through a lot, she grows and learns. There's something heartwarming about seeing a panicking, shivering Lara in the game's prologue, and then seeing her shoot up a band of goons with a grenade launcher screaming, "Run, you bastard!" I mean, well, it's almost heartwarming, apart from, the killing. But what I think makes her journey work so well is her fellow travellers from the Endurance. Every character is well defined and shows a strong relationship with Lara. We have the level-headed Jonah doing his best to keep everyone calm. We have Reyes, the hot-headed crew member who knows her stuff, but rubs people the wrong way. Alex is a colossal nerd who overcompensates for his awkwardness with bad jokes, but he's ultimately harmless and just wants to help. And then there's Whitman, an absolute fucker of a character who radiates small dick energy from the get-go, throws a tantrum on the ship, and then spends most of his time on the island being a traitorous coward who makes literally every situation 300% worse than it would have been to begin with. He believes he knows best and thinks he's God's gift to history because he's a celebrity, don't you know? He's cartoonishly awful throughout the whole game, But this really works well because it succeeds in making you hate him. I actively cheered when he got brutally murdered, and I'm not ashamed to admit this. But the strongest relationships, without a doubt, are with Lara's best friend Sam and her mentor Roth. Sam brings out a more light-hearted side to Lara, dragging her out of her seriousness. There's genuine warmth and affection between the two, to the point where people believe they may have been more than friends, which I can totally see, and if that's your ship, it's valid in my eyes, whatever. But then there's Roth, the man who always shows up at key points in Lara's journey to guide her on her way. There's history and chemistry between the two, with Lara clearly looking up to him as a father figure. There's a heartfelt conversation on the boat between them.
You've got great instincts, girl. You just have to trust them.
That's what my father used to say.
Now, there was a man that ran on instinct. For better or worse. He would have been so proud of you, Lara.
He tells her to believe in herself when he gets injured, and she's the only one who can help him.
We need to send out that SOS. And I'm not climbing anytime soon.
Yeah, I was afraid you were going to say that.
You can do it, Lara. After all, you're a Croft.
I don't think I'm that kind of Croft.
Sure you are.
And his death, which is genuinely tragic just because of how much the game makes us warm to him, is the turning point that tells us Lara has to do this alone. But she's gained the confidence she needs, and in her own words,
I can do this. I can do this. I can do this. I can do that. I can climb this.
the villains are also well written. They're not super deep, but this is pulp adventure, what do you want? However, they're weirdly sympathetic despite being creepy cultists who murder indiscriminately. They're survivors of previous crashes, driven mad by the revelation they can't leave, desperately trying to bring back the spirit of Queen Himiko in the hopes that this will let them leave. The Solari are ideal villains in that they're grim and terrible enough for you to want to stop them, but they're sympathetic enough that their motivations aren't just, look at these generic evil guys. More on that particular criticism in the later games. The central mystery of the island is intriguing too. It's an island off the coast of Japan that sucks in travellers, mooring ships to its beach and tearing planes out of the sky with terrible storms. No one can leave, and no one knows why. And these creepy villains seem to have made this their sick, twisted home. The vibe is very much like the TV show Lost, albeit first season Lost, when everything seemed cool and mysterious and not just the complete gibberish the show descended into by its end. As we unravel the mystery, we learn more about Queen Himiko, an ancient ruler of Yamatai, who's commanded an empire and held great power. We gradually uncover the revelation that she's immortal and passes her soul from vessel to vessel using shrine maidens. It all goes a bit Fatal Frame, honestly, and since that's my favourite horror franchise, I'm totally sold by the weird rituals and the sad, mournful notes from young priestesses knowing that they're about to die horribly. Survivor mostly holds together. There are issues, but many can be overlooked. When Lara first kills someone, she sobs uncontrollably as she weighs the gravity of what she's done, and then 5 minutes later you get to gun down 2 more guys in cool slow-mo, or at least I would have done if my aim wasn't atrocious. Even Lara's line of,
It's scary just how easy it was.
doesn't really excuse it. It's massive ludonarrative dissonance. That said, in order to make it work, it probably would have required a lot of rewrites and possibly a big chunk of the early game being depressing and existential, and you're here to raid tombs and take on an immortal Japanese queen worshipped by a murderous cult, so let's not do that here. The amount of trauma that Lara goes through on her adventure is also kinda comically excessive. She spends a large part of the game with a wound straight through presumably her kidney, which doesn't get properly addressed for ages. The game also goes out of its way to make her land awkwardly on the wound at every opportunity. And then there's a bear trap she gets stuck in, and then she gets mauled by wolves. She gets a plane thrown at her, she almost gets set on fire multiple times. There's a point where this goes from, oh man, poor Lara, to a comedy pratfall routine. I'm surprised the game didn't drop a boulder on her or have her run into a wall painted to look like a tunnel. The excessive torture porn gets tiresome quick, and the story works in spite of it, not because of it. But these gripes aside, I came out of Survivor satisfied. I was locked into this new direction and was excited to see where they'd go next with it. My excitement did not last. Rise of the Tomb Raider followed on from Survivor 2 years later, featured Lara looking at her father's discredited research with new eyes. His theories about an immortal soul suddenly made sense to her after witnessing Himiko and her whole deal, and decides to follow in his footsteps. She discovers he had been seeking the lost city of Katesh in Russia, claimed to be the home of an artifact called the Divine Source, an object of power that gives its holder immortality. When Rise of the Tomb Raider was announced, there was a lot of emphasis in the trailers about how the experience in Yamatai had caused her trauma. She's in therapy, trying to work through the PTSD the situation caused her. This would be weaved into the narrative, and her journey through this would help shape her. Sounds fascinating, I'm on board. It would contribute to the growth of her character so the guilt-ridden young lady can become a confident, sassy badass. Imagine how disappointing it is when this barely gets touched upon. The therapy scenes in the trailer are completely absent from the game itself, although trauma is still part of the story. Early on, she's clearly affected by the ridicule her father faced in his research, and the trauma of her experience on Yamatai is leading her down the same path of obsession. There's a great shot of Lara sitting in the dark poring over her father's notes that speaks volumes about what's going on in her head. The problem is this obsession and this trauma isn't explored nearly enough as the story goes on. There are occasional references from Lara herself about not wanting to cause more death.
It's happening again, isn't it? People are suffering because of my actions.
But it's scattershot and hits the same wall as the previous game, where Lara will state that no one needs to die, before crafting Molotov cocktails and setting fire to a whole squad of men who probably had families who'll miss them. There's potential for a really interesting exploration of how Yamatai changed Lara and how the search for Katesh is changing her further, but the game never explores it enough, and that's a real shame. There's even a part where she talks about the lost tribe defending the city of Katesh needing to move on and let the past go.
So much violence and death. Jacob's people have been through so much, yet they continue to fight. They are bound by an oath taken by their ancestors, a duty handed down from the past. But I see a people who simply want to live in peace. I believe it's time for them to let go of the past.
And this feels like a foundation for Lara to build on for herself and move on from her father, but this line gets said by Lara at a campfire and then is never referenced again. It's so frustrating that the game keeps setting up these interesting examinations of her character and then never follows through. This becomes even more obvious in her interactions with the tribe she encounters, led by a man named Jacob. The game keeps forgetting that Lara is here because of an obsession. She's singularly focused on her objective of finding the lost city of Katesh and the divine source, but the game is happy to drop this to allow her to play hero to the tribe. Yes, they're under attack from a shady organisation equally obsessed on finding the object, but the game doesn't even pull the cliche of the hero and villain aren't that different after all, and instead just decides Lara is the protagonist of this video game, now fight off some mooks and go be the hero. Nothing about Lara's motivations are heroic. She's obsessed and not interested in why the tribe are so determined to protect the lost city. But there's also some flat out bad writing here, as the tribe threaten to do whatever it takes to stop her reaching the source, until the climax of the game when Jacob, their leader, just casually opens the route to the lost city for her. The game argues that she's earned their trust, but the whole purpose of them being there is because they will defend the lost city with their lives. This sudden, okay, sure, go ahead attitude in the 11th hour makes absolutely no sense. Lara at the end of the game becomes a hero when she realises just how powerful the divine source is and breaks it for the betterment of the world. The explanations for why this is the case are solid. It is a powerful object and should not be brought into the wider world. Lara talks to herself about how important it could be for humanity, but ignores the fact that the people shooting her in the face are exactly the kind of people who would use it to make the world a worse place. What isn't a solid explanation is that she's shown to be obsessed with reaching the source to prove her father right, all the way up until the climax of the game, and when she gets to the source, she suddenly says it must be destroyed. There's no conflict, there's no realization, no moment of clarity that shows her that she's gone too far and there's only one way to fix it. She just flips suddenly and then smashes the artifact. It also becomes laughable when Lara lectures her stepmother Anna about how many people have died over all of this, including her brother.
Your men are defeated. Your brother is dead. No! That's what Trinity has wrought. Death. And that's all they'll ever bring.
It would be very sympathetic and would show Lara's softer side, but perhaps would hold more weight if Anna's brother hadn't literally just been killed mere moments before by Lara stabbing him in the throat and saying, "Burn in hell." There are numerous other problems too. The only consistency in Anna's character is that she's so inconsistent. Jacob, the secret immortal prophet, mostly stands around telling Lara he doesn't trust her, but also that he trusts her a lot. Constantine, the main villain, is a generic angry man with some references to a religious fanaticism that, once again, never really gets explored. And Jonah, bless him, as much as I think he's a chill dude and I would love to hang out with, he gets done so dirty in this story. He travels with Lara to Siberia at the start, but they get separated almost immediately. Lara then tells him,
I need to do this alone.
which raises the question about why he's even there in the first place. and then he disappears for the bulk of the game, showing up later on just so that he can be captured in a way that the very same scene shows is inconsistent for the villain's behaviour. This leads to a largely pointless bit of padding where you have to go save him and then he sits at the climax. Why is he even here? Jonah, my man, why didn't they give you anything to do? It also doesn't help that the game's initial setup, which features a lot of woman versus wild elements as Lara tries to survive in the harsh Siberian climate, has absolutely nothing to do with the rest of the game. The Russian setting is barely used. While Survivor really leaned into its Japanese setting, the main way we know this is Russia is because half the game is set in grey concrete bunkers operated by the Soviets. It's not an interesting setting, and the most that Russian folklore got used was in an optional DLC episode, the quite frankly excellent Baba Yaga story, but it has no bearing on the main plot and I feel it was squandered. Rise is an absolute mess of a story that does nothing interesting with Lara as a character. As such, her personality here is practically non-existent. She has no real arc. Her motivations are all over the place, and she barely gets to build or maintain any strong relationships with other characters. It was so bad, in fact, that by the time the third game got announced, I'd forgotten everything that had happened in Rise, which is never a good sign. So with this poor starting point, how did 2018 Shadow of the Tomb Raider fare? Shadow of the Tomb Raider starts off incredibly strong. Lara is hunting after Trinity, the evil organization from the previous game, and she's in Mexico hot on their trail. They appear to be looking for a lost city, and she's determined to find out what they're up to. The game has some great moments in its opening hours, the entire Mexico segment featuring Lara piecing together bits of information to figure out the history. The Day of the Dead party sequence is gorgeous and leads heavily into the local culture in the way that Rise failed to, and there is an actual tomb with supernatural secrets hidden inside. For me, this opening was incredibly Tomb Raider. Aside from Lara Croft raiding some actual tombs, we also have a more confident, albeit somewhat cold, Lara at the forefront, and she goes and starts the apocalypse just like she does in Tomb Raider 4. Oh Lara, what do you like? Unlike Rise, which lost sight of itself almost immediately, Shadow maintains this quality for quite some time. Lara's dooming of the population drags up her trauma from Yamatai as her actions wipe out an entire Mexican village in a tsunami. Jonah accompanies her to Peru, where the two have many great character moments that flesh out their friendship much better than the previous two games ever did. And good lord, there are tombs. Delicious tombs that you can explore and solve puzzles in, and God, I've missed this. Please inject this into my veins. Anyway, even the traipsing through the jungle in Peru after the prologue feels more natural than the awkward bear fights that lead nowhere in Rise. There's a real sense that Lara is trying to uncover something hidden deep within the jungle, and the sequence allows those previously mentioned Jonah interactions to flourish. We'll admit the Jaguar attack has shades of the comically excessive torture upon a survivor though. Her entire back got ripped to shreds. How the hell do you even begin to survive that? You know what, if Indiana Jones can survive falling out of a plane by using a raft on a mountain, I can accept this too. It's fine, whatever. Even arriving at Cuaquiacu, a Peruvian village, doesn't actually get in the way of this. They introduce Abby, who's a likeable character, and the village's impoverished nature due to the actions of foreign visitors is a really interesting angle. I actually liked this guy, who talked about how the village got ruined by trusting the eagle over the condor, which sounded like a poetic way of saying foreigners, specifically Americans, have ravaged the village for their own ends. This does get undermined when the game immediately reveals that no, actually there's a real eagle being a pest that you can shoot down, but for that brief moment, I did enjoy the social commentary. And then we find the hidden city of Paititi, and everything goes horribly, terribly wrong from there. You see, up to this point, we had a pulp adventure story at its best, an adventurer digging up clues to a historical mystery, myths proving to be real, and the adventurer rushing to stop a cartoonishly evil man from using the mythological items to do something bad. It's not a deep story, but it's the exact story I'm here to play through. But Paititi swerves it drastically off this path, and crashes us right into the wall of a white saviour narrative and You see, Paititi, the hidden city, isn't a long-lost city lying in ruins. It's a city that thrives, albeit existing as if centuries of progress had never been made. The occupants are long-lost Mayans with no contact to the outside world. And here comes white British aristocrat Lara Croft ready to save them all from a cult that has ties to Trinity, because Lord knows they couldn't do without this white lady. Despite this society shunning outsiders, Lara is allowed to just waltz in after a brief and honestly not all that convincing conversation. It's here that Lara suddenly becomes the RPG hero who solves everyone's quests. She takes on the mantle of the person who does everything for the rebels in the pursuit of the box that will end the effects of the apocalypse. She works with the rebel leader, who's also the rightful queen of the land, looking to reclaim the throne from a cult leader, who is also the leader of Trinity in one of the most contrived plot reveals ever written. I hate all of this. The story built up a nice momentum of tomb raiding and investigation, which all mostly got thrown out of the window the moment Lara entered the hidden city. The pacing crashes as now Lara plays errand girl to this lost tribe, and encroaching natural disasters that were pushing the plot along up to this point suddenly take a little break. The plot contrivance that Dominguez, the ruthless Trinity leader, is also the cult leader ruling over the hidden city with an iron fist, stops making sense if you even think about it for just 1 second. And of course, the stench of white saviour hangs over everything. I also just don't like the Paititians as a concept. They exist as if time just stopped in this portion of the world. Yes, they've intentionally retreated from the world and hidden themselves away, but the idea that the modern world hasn't touched them in any way until Lara and Dominguez both showed up is laughable. Hell, the previous game in the series had people living off the land in a more traditional fashion, but they weren't above scavenging for items at Soviet sites, providing them with some modern technology. These guys exist as if Lara travelled back in time. In fact, this would have made them more interesting. The desire to maintain the old ways, pushed on by leaders of all stripes, would see rebellion and struggle, younger tribe members getting curious about the outside world, outsiders like Lara being shown a lot more resistance, modern technology sneaking in here and there, despite the leader's best efforts. As it stands, the whole thing is just painfully bland and implausible. Honestly, the only good thing to come out of Paititi is the fact that they have llamas that you can pet. Petting llamas is good, I welcome this, but that's about all I welcome. The problem is though, they inform the rest of the plot. Lara's motivations become less focused on saving the world from her own mistakes, which would tie nicely into her own character arc, and it becomes more about saving the people of Paititi, which once again is forcing Lara into that hero narrative that doesn't really work for her arc. It becomes less about discovering the secrets of the mines through investigation and danger, and more about just asking the tribes what the answers are. And we're forced into trying to care about a nonsensical family squabble as the world is in the process of ending. But where this really becomes a problem is in how it affects Lara's emotional journey. Unlike Rise, her emotional journey here is much clearer. She starts the game as confident, but her stoic, determined persona is clearly a mask over the continued guilt and trauma. This comes out in her interactions with Jonah, showing a woman who can't face up to herself and deflects, often treating her friends somewhat with contempt. And she can honestly come across as unsympathetic. Her determination is a strength, but also a weakness, and she must learn to balance this. And while this starts strong with Jonah talking to her about it and guiding her through her emotions, getting her to open up occasionally...
I mean, I get it. You lock onto a problem and everything else just disappears.
Jonah.
Hey, I'm with you. It's my choice, most of the time. But if we die, who stops the cataclysms? Who keeps Trinity from doing what they want?
Sometimes I feel like I have to keep going, and if I don't, then I'll just let everyone down. But maybe for the sake of a few hours, we could have turned back.
Once Paititi gets placed on the board, her journey becomes a mess. A major turning point for her comes when she and Jonah casually leave Paititi, as you do. Her guilt comes to the forefront because she has failed to find the artifact, Trinity know it's somewhere else, and the Queen has died in her rescue attempt. Trinity attack Lara and Jonah in the jungle, and they get separated. Lara gradually murders her way through a squad, and is then informed by Dominguez's commander, Rourke, that Jonah is dead by his hands, setting Lara off on a murderous rampage. And then after she's exploded an oil processing plant and murdered everyone in sight, Jonah shows up alive and she breaks down. This moment is clearly supposed to be Lara snapping with the weight of the world on her shoulders, but in its execution, at best I felt indifferent, and at worst I was actively mad at this plot point. Lara's grief does not come across well. Queen Unarutu is not an interesting character. Most of her interactions with Lara are objective markers in speech form, with little human interaction beyond that. When Unarutu dies, Lara cries as if she's lost her closest friend, after being awfully dismissive of her actual best friend prior to this. Even leaving Paititi, Lara is shown to be dwelling on the death and ignoring the clues and riddles in front of her, despite her obsession and fascination with the mystery being a key part of her established character. To me, she would be looking deeply into the clues as a way to avenge Unaruto, but instead she's just sad. Her level of grief here is presented almost as large as what she felt for Roth's death, but the difference is a genuinely warm relationship with an established mentor versus a half-developed relationship with a woman she barely knows. I felt nothing for the death. I found Lara's sadness excessive based on their non-existent relationship, and this disconnect took me out of the story completely. I didn't feel what Lara felt. Jonah's supposed death I could understand, but the game makes it clear she's grieving over Unaruto even before Rourke fakes her out with Jonah. And let's talk about that fake out, because no part of this sequence makes sense. First, the game doesn't really explain why a bunch of Trinity troops are just hanging out in an oil field. Rourke taunts Lara over the radio like a villain we care about, but I only knew him as a disembodied voice in Mexico that liked to remind us of his name constantly.
This is Commander Rourke. All teams, get ready for Operation Blackout.
Lara tells Jonah not to contact her because their transmissions are being monitored, only to then contact him 5 minutes later despite the danger of interception still present. And Lara just straight up believing Big Bad Rourke is an irrational blunder that makes Lara look painfully stupid instead of the much more intelligent and perceptive woman that we know she should be. I'd buy her anger, but I'd see her being more skeptical until she's seen a body. The breakdown after her murderous rampage is also notably baffling as it shows shades of survivor's dissonance. In fact, it's the same issue. The game wants us to feel remorse for killing so many people mere moments after reveling in a new mechanic where you can shoot a man with an arrow and make him kill all his colleagues in a hallucinogenic fugue state. This bit made me actively angry with how wildly out of place it all was, and the exact point where I ran out of goodwill for Shadow of the Tomb Raider. There is a brief return to form as Lara and Jonah explore a monk's tomb under a Christian mission, which I wish was longer, before we mount a heroic climactic mission that is hard to really care about because it's still tied so much to the tribe and so much to the nonsense with Dominguez. What started strong and looked set to bring the series back to its roots, lost its way about a third of the way through and never really recovered. While Rise was a confusing mess with promise, Shadow is a train wreck of a story that actively spoiled a potentially great one. I'm going to examine why the story of all these games got so muddled in a moment, but first the important question is, who is Lara now, after all of that? The honest answer is, I don't know. Pinning down a personality for this modern iteration of Lara Croft has become difficult due to the inconsistent writing and a switch in development team for the third title. It was inevitable that the Lara in 2013 was going to be drastically different from the classic character. She was designed to be a more naive, inexperienced and fresh-faced Lara, but her character is intelligent and resourceful, managing to hold herself together in high-stress situations and use her limited resources to the best of her ability. By the end of the game, a solid foundation was built for her. She'd survived her time on the island, and it had opened her eyes to a new world that she now had an interest in discovering more about. It was clear that the Lara at the end was not the Lara at the start. She was ready to start her journey into becoming the Lara that we already know and love, or at least a new, modern interpretation of that. But Rise and Shadow did not make the best of this. Rise couldn't seem to figure out what it was trying to do with its story, and Lara's characterization, which was supposed to be central to the narrative, became muddied. The constant flip-flopping between guilt, obsession, and a confident hero just didn't work well for me. Where her personality in Survivor shone because her resourcefulness came through even when she was panicking, in Rise, she whiplashes between those three states of being with no rhyme or reason. Shadow did the best with a bad start, with a Lara that skipped a few steps and become more confident and self-assured, but the writers couldn't decide if she's overcome her guilt or is still haunted by it, largely because Rise failed to answer that question despite setting up the story around it. The white saviour hero complex makes things worse, swerving Lara from a single-minded treasure hunter to a lawful good RPG hero who takes on any quest presented to her. What's worse is that they write her as more dedicated to a group of people she doesn't know and barely trust her than she is to her supposed best friend Jonah, who she gets incredibly dismissive of at far too many points in the story. This Lara is a confusing mess, and the writers seem so wrapped up in her personality in 2013 that they struggle to move her on from it, leaving the Lara at the end of Shadow feeling like she still needs time to become the Tomb Raider, despite them supposedly spending 3 games attempting to do just that. They also leave her feeling disinterested with adventure right at the end, in a move that feels very un-Lara. There's nothing inherently wrong with making Lara a more rounded character. They certainly tried to do this with Legend and its sequels by bolting more sympathetic characteristics onto the original version of Lara, but this trilogy started strong and then seemingly had no idea where to go from there. So what we're left with is a Lara who's more irrational and unsympathetic, lacks a sense of humour, and has dramatic mood swings. Let's remind ourselves of who Lara Croft was. She was confident, self-assured, a little sassy, and focused on her goals. She knew what she wanted, and she would have it. But she was also knowledgeable and fascinated with history, and charming enough to acquire allies all over the world. How much of this exists in the current Lara? Confidence is sort of there, as evidenced by the opening chapters of Shadow of the Tomb Raider, but this endlessly gets undermined by things like her breakdown in the oil field and the continued self-blame that the story was clearly meant to address and then never did. The focus and determination is there, but I feel that far too often she allows herself to be distracted, with Shadow's white saviour nonsense being the worst culprit for this. As for the sassiness, it's entirely absent. I'm not necessarily expecting her to be throwing out cheesy one-liners everywhere, but this Lara is far too serious. I get that there's guilt and trauma going on with her, but when she's got Jonah right there to bounce off and let off steam with, it's disappointing to not see a more fun side of her personality come through more often. I don't want to criticise this Lara too much though, because there are plenty of fans of this character, particularly those who came to the franchise through the new games. I asked around what people thought of the different versions of Lara, and those who loved the current version loved her determination and her drive. They loved her overcoming danger, and saw her as relatable at the start, and hoped that they could find the strength that she gains in stressful situations of their own. I have no objection to any of that, and if you're one of those fans, more power to you. And the thing is, I can absolutely see 2013's story being inspirational and motivating because her emotional journey there followed a consistent thread, but I struggle to see how the same could be extracted from Rise or Shadow. I feel like she doesn't get the growth she deserves, and the end of Shadow, where she's supposedly now the Tomb Raider, doesn't feel like it's been earned. So what happened to cause the disconnect? And what made the writing of the second two parts of the trilogy feel so disjointed? As far as I can tell, a lot of it is sadly the nature of AAA games development. Rhianna Pratchett, lead writer of the first two games in the trilogy, has mentioned in interviews across the years that AAA games she's worked on have been challenging. Many developers she's worked with have espoused that gameplay is king, so the story is often considered secondary. And while she's always been incredibly diplomatic about it, and I don't doubt that she had plenty of enjoyment working on the games, there has to be some frustration in having a lot of your story shoved aside in favour of gameplay mechanics. And I honestly think that's what happened to most of the storyline. While 2013 is generally great, there are clashes that stem from building a combat-heavy action game and writing a story about a young woman learning to cope with killing someone even in self-defense. Rise's storyline sets up a lot of interesting plot hooks, but the game itself seems to get in the way of it, and it's here I can see the worst of the game and story clashing. A lot of Rise seems determined to stick rigidly to what 2013 set up, but narratively it's nonsense to do that, as Lara has grown as a character, so having a repeat of the previous game isn't moving her story along. That's why the twin pistol nod at the end of 2013 didn't become twin pistols in Rise, because she didn't have them in the previous game, so she shouldn't have them here. It's why she must relearn everything, because we can't have an experience system where Lara learns new abilities otherwise. Challenge tombs are still largely marked in the same way they were as the previous game, but their markers look wildly out of place in the new Siberian setting. And then there's some more questionable stuff, like how an entire area in Rise looks suspiciously similar to an area in 2013. The adherence to the first game is a detriment to the overall experience, both for gameplay and for story. Lara should be advancing and improving, but she's still kind of flailing around like she was in the first game. It's also why I feel the therapy shown in the early trailers isn't in the final game. You can't make that into an action-driven gameplay mechanic, so it's gone. But in the process we lose an insight into her character, which now seems to have been replaced with the campfire journals, because hey, you could do crafting while Lara talks here. But it's why I feel so detached from the story hooks about Lara's relationship with her father, because they also feel scaled back in favour of gameplay mechanics. Because if anyone's able to tell a great story about a woman following in her famous father's footsteps and working to move out of his shadow and forge her own path, it would be the daughter of Terry Pratchett. So I don't blame her for the poor story here, but I can't help but feel her notes contain an even better one that had to be jettisoned so Lara can stab more men in the face. It's also why Shadow starts stronger but then falls apart, because the gameplay design shifted from a focus on survival to exploring ancient sites. And since this is core to the traditional Tomb Raider experience, it works. But the reason it all falls apart at Paititi is because the civilization isn't there for story reasons, it's there because open world RPGs are popular, so we need an open-ended town area where Lara can take on side quests. And should be obvious from my previous criticisms, I just don't feel like it works for the story the game starts out telling. And what makes this astounding to me is that Tomb Raider 2, a game built entirely around its gameplay with the story hastily written later, holds together better as a singular narrative than either Rise or Shadow, which were designed from the ground up to be narratively driven. But I am a lifelong Tomb Raider fan, and therefore I can't just sit here and complain about it. What is it about the games that I would improve to make them fit more of what I would expect from a series such as this? 2013 is generally fine. Sure, there are flaws, but there's nothing that inherently breaks the story. The emotional through line is maintained, and Lara's development as the character is clear. I'd personally make the challenge tomb stuff part of the main gameplay rather than side areas, but otherwise the structure's sound, and it creates a good foundation for a trilogy. For Rise, there would need to be a complete restructure. First of all, bringing back the therapy sessions from the trailers. Let's really explore and work through Lara's grief. Instead of talking about herself at campfires, key moments of the story could flash her back to her therapy sessions, working through her thoughts about her father and her experience on Yamatai. She could remember the lessons taught to her through therapy to get through tough moments, and through this she develops further as a character. You could even have dialogue choices if you wish to make it more interactive, and I think that would be a really interesting way of exploring Lara. It would also break the game up into neat segments. Also, let's focus on Lara uncovering the mysteries of the Source and place more emphasis on following her father's trail. Far too often Trinity dictate the story direction, and well, I'm going to get to them soon. More puzzle solving and discoveries would make the story flow better and put Lara's search at the forefront. Jonah either needs to not be there or have a larger role. I would prefer the latter, with him acting as Lara's sidekick and a voice of reason, like he does in the better parts of Shadow. There could certainly be moments where they get separated, like at the start of the game, but this doesn't need to be Jonah put on a bus for 2/3 of the game. I'd also prefer a more conflicted relationship between Lara and Jacob's people. Highlight the flaws in Lara's obsession by having her take on those who are more reluctant to fight her, but are sworn to protect the Source for the good of the world. Make her learn through her interactions with them, and have them staunchly refuse to help her reach the Source. They're sworn to protect it, and Lara is supposed to be a threat to them. Trinity can still be present, but make it more explicit that they are trying to find the Source because of concerns about a false prophet, or the Vatican trying to claim an artifact of immortality for themselves. Heavily lean into the secret Christian cabal angle that we keep seeing hinted at, and not just through the villain having weird stigmata for some reason. In fact, overhaul Trinity in general. As it stands, their aims are unclear and they don't feel much of a threat. Flesh them out beyond generic shadowy cabal and put some serious stakes on them. Don't bring their leader into the following game with a motivation that clashes with literally everything else they've been supposedly doing for centuries. In Rise specifically, make them a bigger threat to Jacob's people than Lara, and Lara can still earn their trust through helping them. But then let's have Lara's obsession force her to betray that newfound trust by breaking into the home of the Source independently, causing her to realise at the final hurdle what a terrible mistake she's making, and leading her to smash the artifact or be destroyed by the Deathless. Explore what's going on in her head more. Have this be the moment that makes her realise she's gone too far and decide to forge a new path. For Shadow, keep the opening, but separate Dominguez from Trinity. In fact, remove them from the story entirely. Make him a different kind of generically evil figure. Perhaps one of the industrialists, slowly choking Kuwakyaku to death. Make his ties to Paititi historical, like Sam's to Himiko in 2013, and his obsession to find the lost artifacts just part of a maniacal desire to have his empire take over and make him filthy rich. Get rid of the living tribe and make the city a lost ruin filled with clues and dangers. The best parts of the game were the trials that led to the city, the cenote with the creepy weird creature things in there, I don't know, and the tomb hidden under the mission of San Juan anyway. So let's make the game's journey an entirely investigative one. If you must have a hub area with people to work with, expand Kuwakyaku and make their plight more central to the story. I connected with those people better than I did the people of Paititi anyway, and if they're ancestors of those people, there's a lot of interesting cultural stuff that could be covered there. And make Lara's involvement less of a white saviour, please. As for her personal journey through Shadow, expand on her coldness towards Jonah. Yes, she's overcome her guilt and trauma, but it's caused her to close herself off emotionally. Perhaps by working with the people of Kuwakyaku and through interactions with Jonah, she could realise the importance of relying on others, and become less of a cold killing machine. Her relationship with Jonah grows, and perhaps she reconnects with Sam, who inexplicably left at the end of 2013 and never returned. I've heard this may be explained in the comics, but a plot point shouldn't require reading supplemental material to understand, so this is still a problem. This is the final part of her journey when she's become a stone-cold badass, but one that knows how to crack a joke and rely on her allies at the same time. She will have arrived at all the elements that make up the old Lara in a more natural way, and while I doubt she'll become an exact replica of classic Lara, she would end up being a more sympathetic modern take on the character. Still very Lara Croft, but a post-Uncharted variant, and I'd be down with this. When it comes to Lara Croft, I'm open to change, if the key elements are there. I want a badass adventurer who's cocky, capable and sassy, but who also has a deep devotion to history and a band of allies she relies on for information and assistance. The elements are sort of there now, and they just don't fit together very well. Except the sass, current Lara lacks that sense of humour I loved about the old Lara, and I want to see more of it. For the next Tomb Raider game, I want them to stay on this continuity, but with a Lara that has all these elements fitting together better. I want to see a stronger focus on narrative instead of gameplay as king, so that a great game can have a great story holding it together. Make them work side by side instead of prioritising one over the other. If Crystal Dynamics or Eidos Montreal aren't sure what direction to go with this idea, then the good news is a template exists. A year prior to Shadow of the Tomb Raider, Naughty Dog released an Uncharted game called The Lost Legacy. It replaced series protagonist Nathan Drake with Chloe Fraser, a sassy and cocky Australian treasure hunter who'd last been seen in Uncharted 3. It emphasised puzzle solving and exploration through ancient sites, and because it's Naughty Dog, there was a heavy focus on character development. And for me, it felt like the best Tomb Raider game of the 2010s, and it didn't even have the Tomb Raider name. I'm not saying literally make this game, but I hope the team look at it and learn a few lessons about how to make a modern take on the sassy lady adventurer without removing its heart. I still remain hopeful for the future of Tomb Raider. This attempt at a reboot was clumsy but had a lot of promise in many areas. And despite my disappointment, my interest in the series has not diminished, and nor will it ever diminish. And I will be there for the next installment whenever it arrives. I just hope that we can see a Lara Croft with much more of what made the original Lara Croft such an icon. I know it can be done, and I look forward to seeing it.
They'll know my name after the storms are passing through. They'll know my name when they've forgotten all about you. They'll know my name after the storms are passing through. They'll know my name when they've forgotten all about you. They're calling out my name.